The clatter of hooves against packed dirt filled the dusty main street of Independence, California, as Josephine Blackwood was marched toward the auction block, her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her skin. The year was 1878, and the crowd gathering in the center of town buzzed with anticipation, but not for the usual livestock or property sale. Today, they were selling a woman. $500, shouted Walter Blackwood, her late husband's brother, as he yanked her forward. Starting bid for this fine woman. She comes with the debt of her husband. God rest his soul, but she's young, strong, and can cook like an angel. Josephine's throat tightened with each step. At 22, she had already endured enough heartache to last several lifetimes, losing her parents to cholera, marrying Richard Blackwood out of necessity rather than love, and then watching him die from a bullet in a saloon fight just 6 months ago. But this being sold like cattle to pay a debt she knew nothing about, this was beyond comprehension. The summer sun beat down mercilessly as Walter continued his sales pitch. My brother left this world owing me $2,000. This woman is all that's left to settle accounts. A lie. Josephine knew it was a lie, but her protests had fallen on deaf ears. The sheriff claimed he couldn't interfere with family matters, and the few friends she had made in Independence weren't powerful enough to stand against Walter Blackwood, who owned half the businesses in town. As Walter continued shouting her supposed virtues to the crowd, Josephine scanned the faces, looking for anyone who might help. Most averted their eyes in shame or stared with morbid curiosity. Some of the men were already reaching for their wallets, calculating if she was worth the investment. That's when she saw him, standing at the edge of the crowd with a look of disgust etched across his sun-weathered face. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a shock of sandy hair visible beneath his worn Stetson. His blue eyes met hers for just a moment, but it was enough for Josephine to recognize something different in his gaze, not pity, not lust, but righteous anger. "Do I hear 600?" Walter called out, and hands began to rise. The stranger pushed through the crowd, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step. "I reckon this ain't legal," he announced, voice carrying across the suddenly quiet gathering. Walter's face reddened. "Who the hell are you to say what's legal in Independence?" "Name's Finn Sullivan," the stranger replied, standing tall. "Just rode in from Sacramento. Been working with the territorial marshal's office." He wasn't wearing a badge, but something in his confident stance made even Walter hesitate. "And I know for a fact that selling people to pay debts was outlawed even before the war." Walter's grip on Josephine's arm tightened painfully. "This is different. She inherited her husband's debt to me. It's perfectly legal." "I owed him nothing," Josephine said, finding her voice at last. "Richard never borrowed money from Walter. Never." Finn Sullivan studied her face, then Walter's. "Seems we've got conflicting claims here. I suggest we take this matter to the county judge." "Judge Wilson's out of town for 2 weeks," Walter snapped, "and I ain't waiting. I've got papers that prove what she owes." "Papers can lie," Finn said simply. "People too." His hand rested casually on his holstered Colt. "I'll give you another option. I'll pay the debt myself right now and take the lady's marker." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Walter's eyes narrowed with calculation. $2,000. "You carrying that kind of money, Cowboy?" "500, Finn countered. "That's your starting bid. Seems fair, seeing as you've got no proof she should be sold at all." "The papers, I'd like to see those papers." "So would the marshal, I expect." Finn's smile didn't reach his eyes. 500 cash in hand, and this ends peacefully." The crowd watched in tense silence as Walter weighed his options. Finally, he thrust out his hand. "Fine, 500. But once you see what you're getting, you'll know you overpaid." Josephine stood rigid as money changed hands. She'd escaped being auctioned only to be purchased by a stranger, a handsome stranger with kind eyes, but a stranger nonetheless. After counting the bills, Walter shoved her toward Finn. "She's your problem now." Finn caught her gently by the elbow, then immediately set about untying her wrists. "You all right, madam?" he asked quietly. "Why did you do that?" Josephine whispered, rubbing her chafed skin as the crowd began to disperse. "Because selling people ain't right," he said simply. Then, louder for those still within earshot, "I'll be collecting Mrs. Blackwood's things from her home. I expect no interference." Walter spat in the dirt. "Take whatever's left, most of it's mine anyway." An hour later, Josephine stood in the small cabin she'd shared with Richard, hastily packing her few possessions while Finn Sullivan waited outside. Her mind raced with questions and fears. What did this man truly want with her? Where would they go? What would happen next? When she emerged with a single carpet bag and a small wooden box containing her mother's locket, Finn was leaning against the porch rail, watching the sunset paint the Sierra Nevada mountains with gold and crimson. "I don't know how to thank you," she began uncertainly. "Don't thank me yet," he replied, straightening. "We've got a long ride ahead if we're going to stay ahead of trouble. Where are we going? First, to a friend's ranch outside of town. Then, once we've rested the horses, we're heading to Sacramento." "Sacramento? Why?" Finn's expression softened slightly. "Because that's where we'll find proof your brother-in-law is lying about that debt." "How can you be sure?" "Because," Finn said, helping her onto a chestnut mare he'd acquired for her, "I knew your husband." Josephine nearly fell from the saddle in shock. "You knew Richard?" Finn mounted his own horse, a powerful black gelding. "Not well, but enough to know he wasn't the type to borrow money from his brother, and certainly not $2,000. As they rode away from Independence, Josephine felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. The setting sun cast their long shadows ahead of them on the dusty trail, stretching toward an uncertain future. "Mr. Sullivan," she said after they'd ridden in silence for several miles, "what happens if we can't prove Walter is lying?" Finn glanced at her, his expression solemn in the fading light. "Then I guess you'll owe me $500, Mrs. Blackwood." Despite everything, Josephine found herself smiling. "It's Josephine," she said, "and I believe I already owe you far more than money can repay." The Sullivan Ranch sat nestled in a small valley about 10 miles outside of Independence. As they approached in the gathering darkness, lanterns flickered to life, and a weathered man with Finn's same sandy hair emerged from the modest but well-maintained ranch house. "Frank Sullivan," Finn explained. "My uncle. Best man I know." Frank welcomed them with hot food and no questions, offering Josephine a small room that had once belonged to his daughter, now married and living in San Francisco. After days of Walter's threatening presence, the simple kindness nearly undid her. "Thank you," she whispered to Finn as he showed her to the room, "for everything." He nodded awkwardly. "Get some rest. We leave at first light." Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams filled with auction blocks and the sound of Walter Blackwood's voice. She woke before dawn to the smell of coffee and bacon. When she entered the kitchen, Finn and Frank were bent over papers spread across the wooden table. "These land deeds," Frank was saying, "they're the key to everything." Both men looked up as she entered. "Mrs. Blackwood," Frank said, standing politely, "I hope you slept well." "As well as could be expected," she replied, accepting the coffee he offered. "And please call me Josephine." Finn gestured to the papers. "We think we know what your brother-in-law is really after." "The Silver Creek property," Frank explained. "Your husband owned land near a new silver strike. Walter wants it." Josephine frowned. "Richard never mentioned any property besides our cabin." Most men don't tell their wives everything, Frank said gently. Richard did, she insisted. We had no secrets. Finn and Frank exchanged glances. The deed is registered in Sacramento under Richard Blackwood's name, Finn said, but there's a complication. If he died with debts, creditors could claim the property. So Walter invented a debt, Josephine concluded, understanding dawning. He was never after the money, he wanted the land all along. And he needed you gone, Finn added grimly. As Richard's widow, you inherit everything unless there's a will stating otherwise. There was no will, she said. Richard always said everything he had was mine if anything happened to him. Frank nodded. Then by law, you own that property. And from what we've heard, it could be worth a fortune. Before they could discuss further, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Frank peered out the window and cursed softly. Walter Blackwood, he said, with the sheriff and 3 men. Finn moved swiftly, gathering the papers. Out the back, he told Josephine. The horses are ready. But your uncle will be fine, Frank assured her. I've known Sheriff Hayes since he was in short pants. I can handle him. Moments later, Josephine found herself once again on horseback, riding hard alongside Finn as the sun began to rise over the eastern mountains. They took a little used trail that wound through dense pine forest, avoiding the main road to Sacramento. Walter must have suspected something when I mentioned the marshal's office, Finn explained as they paused to water the horses at a small stream. He knows the land deed is vulnerable if he can prove Richard died in debt. But he can't prove it, Josephine said, because it's not true. Finn looked troubled. He can if he has forged documents and a corrupt sheriff willing to back his claim. Then what hope do we have? The truth, Finn said simply, and friends in high places. As they continued their journey, Josephine studied her companion more carefully. His clothes were those of a working cowboy, but he spoke with the education of someone who'd seen more of the world than most ranch hands. You said you worked with the marshal's office, she ventured. Are you a lawman? Finn hesitated. Was, for a time. Now I work for the railroad, investigating land claims before they lay new track. Is that how you knew Richard? A shadow crossed his face. Not exactly. I knew your husband from before. We both fought for the Union. The war had ended 13 years ago, but Josephine knew its shadows still haunted many men. Richard rarely spoke of those days. Most of us don't, Finn replied quietly. Some memories are best left buried. They rode in silence for a time, the rhythm of hooves against earth the only sound. The day grew warm as the sun climbed higher, and they stopped in the shade of an enormous oak to rest and eat the provisions Frank had packed for them. Why are you helping me? Josephine asked suddenly. The truth, please. Finn looked at her for a long moment. Because I made a promise once. To help the families of men who didn't make it home from battle. I wasn't there when Richard didn't come back from that saloon, but I'm here now. You feel obligated. At first, he admitted. But now. He didn't finish the thought, instead standing abruptly and checking the horse's saddle cinches. We should move on. Still a long way to Sacramento. That night, they made camp in a protected hollow, far from any trail. Finn built a small fire, keeping it low to avoid detection. The mountain air grew chilly as darkness fell, and Josephine wrapped herself in the blanket he'd provided. Tell me about yourself, she said as they sat beside the fire. I know so little about the man who bought me. His mouth quirked in a half-smile. I didn't buy you. I paid off a fake debt to keep you from being sold. Semantics, she replied with her own smile. Either way, I owe you. You owe me nothing. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks into the night sky. I was born in Boston. My father was a banker who lost everything in '57. We came west with nothing but hope and ended up working my uncle's ranch. When the war came, I enlisted. After, I couldn't go back to ranching, needed to keep moving. That's how I ended up working for the marshals, then the railroad. No wife, family. Finn shook his head, never found the time. Or the right person. He looked up at her. What about you? How did you end up with Richard Blackwood? Josephine stared into the flames. My parents died when I was 18. Richard was kind to me when no one else was. He offered marriage and I accepted out of gratitude and necessity. He was a good man, but you didn't love him, Finn finished softly. I cared for him deeply, she corrected. But no, it wasn't the kind of love I'd dreamed of as a girl, she sighed. Dreams are luxuries for people with choices. And now, what do you dream of now? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibilities neither dared name. Freedom, she finally answered. The chance to make my own choices, to build something that's truly mine. Finn nodded slowly. If that Silver Creek property is as valuable as they say, you'll have that chance. If we can prove Walter is lying, we will, he promised. Now get some sleep. I'll take first watch. Josephine lay awake long after Finn thought she was sleeping, watching him silhouette against the stars. For the first time since Richard's death, she felt something stir within her, not just hope for safety, but something warmer, more dangerous. She closed her eyes, trying to quiet her thoughts. Dreams were still luxuries she couldn't afford. Morning broke clear and cool. They ate a quick breakfast of jerky and hardtack, then continued their journey toward Sacramento. The terrain grew rougher as they climbed into the foothills, following game trails and old Indian paths that Finn seemed to know by instinct. How much farther? Josephine asked as they paused atop a ridge, surveying the vast landscape below. Another day, maybe two, Finn replied. Depends on whether we're being followed. As if his words had summoned trouble, a distant rifle shot echoed across the valley. Instinctively, Finn grabbed Josephine and pulled her from her horse, both of them tumbling into the shelter of boulders as bullets kicked up dust where they had stood. Walter's men, he growled, drawing his revolver. Josephine's heart pounded painfully against her ribs. How did they find us? Must have picked up our trail. Finn peered carefully over the rocks. I count 3 riders moving up the ridge. We need to move. Where? He pointed to a dense forest about half a mile down the slope. There. We'll lose them in the trees. Their horses had bolted at the gunfire, leaving them on foot. Staying low, they scrambled down the rocky hillside, sliding and stumbling as more shots rang out behind them. Keep going, Finn urged when Josephine fell, scraping her hands raw on the rough ground. He helped her up, one arm around her waist, and they half ran, half slid toward the tree line. They reached the forest just as their pursuers crested the ridge. The dense pines swallowed them, muffling the sounds of pursuit. Finn led her deeper into the woods, moving swiftly but carefully, leaving as little trail as possible. We can't outrun them forever, Josephine gasped as they paused to catch their breath. Don't need to, Finn replied. Just need to stay ahead until nightfall. They won't risk these woods in the dark. Hours passed as they pushed through the forest. Josephine's dress was torn, her feet blistered in boots not made for such travel, but she pressed on without complaint. As Finn had predicted, when dusk began to fall, the sounds of pursuit faded. They found a hollow formed by the massive roots of a fallen sequoia and tucked themselves inside. Without a fire, the night air bit through their clothes and they huddled together for warmth. I'm sorry, Finn whispered, his breath warm against her hair. I should have been more careful. This isn't your fault, she replied, unconsciously pressing closer to his solid warmth. You risked everything to help me. His arm tightened around her. We'll reach Sacramento, I promise. Something in his voice made her look up. In the dim moonlight filtering through the trees, his face was inches from hers, his expression unreadable. "Why are you really doing this, Finn?" she asked softly. "The whole truth this time." For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, then he sighed, a sound of surrender. "I knew your husband in the war," he began. "We weren't friends exactly, but we served in the same regiment. There was a battle near Chattanooga. Richard saved my life, took a bullet meant for me." His voice grew rough with emotion. "Before they carried him away, he made me promise that if he didn't make it, I'd look after his family back home." Josephine stared at him in confusion. "But Richard survived the war. He came home." "Yes," Finn acknowledged. "Against all odds, he recovered. We lost touch after that. But I never forgot the promise." He met her eyes. "When I heard about his death and then saw Walter trying to sell you, I couldn't stand by." "So it is obligation," she whispered, trying to ignore the ache in her chest. His hand found hers in the darkness. "It started that way," he admitted. "But now—" A branch snapped nearby, silencing them both. Finn's body tensed, one hand going to his revolver while the other pulled Josephine deeper into the shelter of the roots. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. A lantern beam swept across the forest floor, stopping just short of their hiding place. Josephine held her breath, pressing her face against Finn's chest to muffle any sound. "They can't have gone far," a gruff voice said. "We'll find them at first light." Another voice, familiar and hated, replied, "They'd better be alive when you do. That woman owns property I need. Walter. He'd come himself, not trusting his men to complete the job." "What about Sullivan?" the first voice asked. "Kill him," Walter said coldly. "Make it look like an accident. The woman, bring to me unharmed." The lantern light moved away and the voices faded. Josephine's whole body trembled with fear and rage. "He admitted it," she whispered fiercely. "He admitted he's after the property." Finn's expression was grim. "And now he's admitted to conspiracy to murder. If we can get to Sacramento, we'll have enough to see him hang." "If," Josephine repeated, the single word heavy with doubt. They spent a sleepless night, taking turns watching for danger. As the first gray light of dawn filtered through the trees, Finn touched Josephine's shoulder gently. "We need to move," he said. "They'll be searching for us again soon." They set off through the forest, moving as quietly as possible, staying off game trails and using a small stream to mask their tracks. By midday, they had descended into lower foothills, the trees thinning as they approached more settled country. "There's a stage stop about 5 miles ahead," Finn said as they paused by a spring to drink. "If we can reach it, we can get transportation to Sacramento. And if Walter's men are watching the roads, then we'll find another way," he said with grim determination. "I'm not letting them take you, Josephine." The way he said her name sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. Despite their dire circumstances, or perhaps because of them, she was increasingly aware of Finn not just as her protector, but as a man. His strength, his unwavering commitment to helping her, the gentleness in his touch when he helped her over rough terrain, all combined to create feelings she couldn't deny, however inconvenient they might be. They reached the stage stop as evening approached a small cluster of buildings beside the Sacramento road, including a tavern that doubled as a boarding house. Finn insisted Josephine wait hidden in the trees while he scouted ahead. She watched anxiously as he approached the tavern, his stride casual, just another dusty traveler seeking refreshment. Long minutes passed before he emerged and signaled for her to join him. "No sign of Walter or his men," he reported as she hurried to his side. "I've secured us rooms for the night and places on tomorrow's stage to Sacramento." The tavern keeper's wife, a plump, motherly woman named Mrs. Hollister, took one look at Josephine's torn dress and exhausted face and immediately shepherded her upstairs to a small but clean room. "Your husband says you were set upon by bandits," she clucked sympathetically, providing a basin of warm water and clean towels. "Lost your horses and all your belongings. In my 40 years in this territory, I've never seen such lawlessness." Josephine hesitated at the word husband but didn't correct the woman. Better to maintain the pretense if it kept them safe. "Yes," she agreed. "We were very fortunate to escape with our lives." "Well, you're safe now," Mrs. Hollister assured her. "Dinner's at 6, and I've laid out one of my daughter's old dresses for you. It might be a bit large, but it's clean." After she left, Josephine sank onto the narrow bed, overcome with relief at the simple comforts: a roof overhead, a soft mattress, clean water to wash away the grime of their flight through the wilderness. She changed into the borrowed dress, a simple blue calico that hung loosely on her frame but felt like the finest silk after days in her torn and filthy clothing. When she descended to the tavern's main room for dinner, Finn was waiting at a table in the corner, his back to the wall, eyes constantly scanning the room. He stood as she approached, a flash of something like admiration crossing his face before he masked it with his usual serious expression. "You look better," he said simply, holding her chair. "I feel human again," she replied, breathing in the savory aroma of Mrs. Hollister's beef stew. "Though I'll feel safer once we reach Sacramento. The stage leaves at dawn," he told her, keeping his voice low. "We should be in the city by tomorrow evening." They ate hungrily, the simple fare tasting like a feast after days of trail rations. As they finished, the tavern began filling with other travelers and local farmers coming in for evening drinks. The noise level rose, providing them cover for private conversation. "Once we reach Sacramento," Finn said, leaning close, "we'll go directly to Judge Harmon. He's an honest man and an old friend of the marshal. He can help us access the land records and verify that Walter's debt claim is fraudulent. And if he succeeds in proving it's real, he won't," Finn assured her. "We heard him admit it was a lie, remember? Besides, I've been thinking about it. If Richard really owed Walter money, why wait until after his death to collect? Why not demand payment while Richard was alive?" Josephine nodded slowly. "You're right. Richard would have told me about such a debt, and Walter seemed almost pleased when Richard died. I thought at the time it was just their old rivalry, but now we know he was seeing an opportunity," Finn finished grimly. "The property must be worth far more than $2,000 for him to go to these lengths." "What happens after we prove he's lying?" Josephine asked. "Will I truly own the Silver Creek property? By right of inheritance, yes. You can sell it, work it, or leave it untouched, whatever you choose. Freedom," she thought. The chance to make her own choices, just as she'd told Finn she dreamed of. As if reading her thoughts, he added softly, "You'll be a wealthy woman, Josephine, able to go anywhere, do anything." Something in his tone made her look up sharply. "And what will you do once this is over?" he shrugged, not meeting her eyes. "Move on to the next job, I suppose." The railroads surveying new routes through Nevada. The thought of him leaving, of never seeing him again after all they'd been through together, created an unexpected hollowness in her chest. But before she could respond, the tavern door burst open, admitting a gust of cold night air and 3 rough-looking men. Finn tensed, his hand dropping to his revolver. "Walter's men," he breathed. "Don't look at them." Josephine kept her gaze fixed on the table, her heart racing as the men stomped to the bar, loudly demanding whiskey. They hadn't seen her and Finn yet, tucked as they were in the darkest corner of the room. "Go upstairs," Finn whispered. "Lock your door, I'll handle this." "I won't leave you alone against 3 men," she protested. "Please, Josephine, if anything happened to you," he stopped, jaw tight with emotion he couldn't express. She reached across the table, squeezing his hand briefly. "Be careful." Slipping away from the table, she moved quietly toward the stairs, keeping her face averted from the newcomers. She'd almost reached the bottom step when a rough voice called out, "Well, look what we have here, boys. Ain't that Blackwood's widow?" Josephine froze as heavy footsteps approached. A hand grabbed her arm, spinning her around to face a bearded man with cold, calculating eyes. "You've led us quite a chase, Mrs. Blackwood," he sneered. "Your brother-in-law's mighty anxious to see you." "Let go of me," she demanded, trying to pull free. "I don't think so, lady." "You're coming," with the distinct sound of a revolver being cocked interrupted him. Finn stood just behind the man, his Colt pressed against the back of his head. "Take your hands off her," Finn said quietly, "or I'll scatter your brains across Mrs. Hollister's clean floor." The tavern had gone silent, every eye on the tense tableau. The other two men stood frozen by the bar, hands hovering near their weapons. "You're outnumbered, Sullivan," one called. 3 against 1. "Then I suggest you be the first to draw," Finn replied evenly. "You might get lucky. But your friend here definitely won't." The bearded man slowly released Josephine's arm. She backed away, heart hammering in her chest. "Now," Finn continued, "you boys are going to turn around and ride back to Walter Blackwood. Tell him Mrs. Blackwood will see him in court in Sacramento, where she'll be filing charges of attempted kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy to murder." "You think you can just walk away?" the bearded man growled. "Blackwood's offering $1,000 for her return. And how much for a pine box?" Finn asked coldly. "Because that's what you'll be going home in if you try to take her." The standoff might have erupted into violence if Mrs. Hollister hadn't appeared with a double-barreled shotgun. "Not in my establishment, gentlemen," she announced firmly. "Take your disagreement elsewhere, or I'll have my husband fetch the sheriff." The mention of law enforcement seemed to give Walter's men pause. After a tense moment, the bearded man nodded slightly. "This ain't over," he warned. "We'll be waiting." "I'm counting on it," Finn replied. The men backed toward the door, keeping their hands visible. Once they'd gone, the tavern erupted in excited chatter. Finn holstered his revolver and turned to Josephine, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right?" she nodded, though her legs felt unsteady. "They know we're here. They'll be watching the stage." "Then we won't take the stage," he decided. "Mrs. Hollister," he called to their hostess, "is there a back way out of here?" The woman nodded grimly. "Through the kitchen. My husband can take you in our wagon as far as the Johnson place. They might lend you horses." Within 20 minutes, they were bundled into the back of a hay wagon, covered with a tarp as Mr. Hollister drove them silently through the darkness. Josephine lay beside Finn, acutely aware of his proximity, the solid warmth of his body against hers. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I keep putting you in danger." In the darkness, his hand found hers. "You have nothing to apologize for. But why risk your life this way? A promise made years ago can't be worth all this." He was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "It's not just the promise anymore, Josephine." Her breath caught. "Then what?" Instead of answering, he shifted, leaning over her in the darkness. She couldn't see his expression, but she felt his breath against her cheek, then the tentative touch of his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. Instead, her arms wound around his neck, drawing him closer as the kiss deepened. In that moment, the danger, the uncertainty, the hardships of their journey all faded away, leaving only the overwhelming rightness of being in his arms. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Finn rested his forehead against hers. "That's why," he murmured. The wagon jolted to a stop before she could respond. Mr. Hollister's whispered, "We're here," sent them scrambling to disentangle themselves and emerge from beneath the tarp. The Johnson place turned out to be a prosperous-looking farm, its main house dark except for a single lantern in a downstairs window. Mr. Johnson, a taciturn man with a military bearing, listened to their story without comment, then nodded once. "Stables are out back," he said. "Take the bay mare and the gray gelding. They're fast and sure-footed. Sacramento's about 30 miles due west. Follow the creek. It'll keep you off the main road." As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Johnson appeared with a bundle of food and a woman's riding clothes for Josephine. "These were my daughters," she explained. "More practical than that dress for where you're going." Within the hour, they were riding again, following the silvery ribbon of creek that wound through the dark landscape. They traveled in silence, both still processing what had happened in the wagon, the kiss that had changed everything between them. As dawn broke, they stopped to rest the horses and eat a quick meal from Mrs. Johnson's provisions. Sitting side by side on a fallen log, Josephine finally found the courage to address what had happened. "About last night," she began hesitantly. Finn looked at her steadily. "I won't apologize for kissing you," he said, "but I will apologize if I've made you uncomfortable." "You haven't," she assured him. "It's just complicated. Because of Richard," she nodded slowly, "and because of everything else. This land claim, Walter's pursuit, our uncertain future." She met his gaze directly. "I don't know what happens next, Finn, for either of us." He took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "I don't either," he admitted. "But I know what I want to happen. Once this is over, once you're safe and Walter is dealt with, I want the chance to court you properly, to see if what I feel, what I think we both feel, is as real as it seems." The simple honesty of his declaration brought tears to her eyes. "I would like that," she whispered. He smiled, a real, unguarded smile that transformed his face. Then, becoming serious again, he added, "But first, we need to get to Sacramento and settle this business with Walter." They rode hard through the day, stopping only to rest the horses and themselves. By late afternoon, the spires of Sacramento's Capitol building were visible on the horizon. The city had grown dramatically since the gold rush days, spreading along the banks of the American River, a bustling hub of commerce and government. As they approached the outskirts, Finn led them to a modest boarding house run by an elderly widow named Mrs. Chen. "A friend," he explained to Josephine. "She helps the marshal's office sometimes. We'll be safe here." Mrs. Chen, a tiny woman with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense manner, took one look at their trail-worn appearance and ushered them inside without questions. She provided hot water for bathing, clean clothes, and a simple but hearty meal, all without asking who they were running from or why. "Judge Harmon will see us first thing tomorrow," Finn told Josephine as they sat in Mrs. Chen's cozy kitchen after dinner. "I sent a message while you were resting." "And then what?" "We present our case. The land records will show Richard's ownership of the Silver Creek property. Walter will have to produce proof of the alleged debt, which we know he can't do honestly." Josephine sipped her tea thoughtfully. "What if he forged documents or bribed officials?" "Possible," Finn acknowledged. "But Judge Harmon is incorruptible, and there's still the matter of Walter attempting to sell you and sending men to kidnap or kill us. Those are serious crimes, regardless of any debt." "I'm afraid," she admitted, "not just of Walter, but of what happens after. I've never owned anything valuable. I've never had choices before." Finn's expression softened. "You'll learn, and you won't be alone unless you want to be." She reached across the table to touch his hand. "I don't want to be alone," she said softly. Morning found them dressed in their borrowed best clothes, walking toward the imposing courthouse in the center of Sacramento. Judge Martin Harmon, A stern-faced man with iron-gray hair and penetrating eyes received them in his chambers, listening intently as Finn explained the situation. "Serious allegations, Mr. Sullivan," he said when Finn finished, "especially against a man of Mr. Blackwood's standing and independence." "Every word is true, Your Honor," Josephine affirmed. "Walter Blackwood attempted to sell me to pay a debt that never existed, then sent armed men after us when we escaped." Judge Harmon studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you, Mrs. Blackwood, but belief isn't enough in a court of law. We need evidence." "The land records," Finn prompted. "They'll show Richard Blackwood's clear ownership of the Silver Creek property." "Indeed they do," the judge confirmed, pulling a folder from his desk. "I took the liberty of requesting them when I received your message." "Richard Blackwood purchased the land 3 years ago, paying in full. There are no liens or encumbrances recorded." Josephine felt a surge of relief. "So the property is legally mine." As his widow, yes, assuming there was no will stating otherwise. "There wasn't," she confirmed. "Then the property is yours," Judge Harmon stated. "As for these debt claims," he frowned. "Has Mr. Walter Blackwood produced any documentation of this alleged loan?" "Only his word," Finn replied. "And we overheard him admit it was a fabrication designed to gain control of the Silver Creek property." The judge made a note. "Hearsay, unfortunately, but it does establish motive for his other actions." A knock at the door interrupted them. Judge Harmon's clerk entered, looking nervous. "Your Honor, there's a Mr. Walter Blackwood here with Sheriff Hayes from Independence. They're demanding to see you immediately about these very people." Judge Harmon's bushy eyebrows rose. "Well, this is convenient timing. Show them in." Josephine tensed as Walter strode into the room, followed by Sheriff Hayes. Walter's face darkened with anger when he saw them. "There they are," he exclaimed. "I demand their arrest, Judge. This man kidnapped my sister-in-law and stole $500 from me in the process." "That's a lie," Finn said calmly. "I paid that money to prevent an illegal human auction." Walter's face reddened. "She owed me a debt inherited from my brother. I was simply exercising my legal right to collect." Judge Harmon held up a hand. "One moment, Mr. Blackwood. Do you have documentation of this alleged debt?" "Of course." Walter reached into his coat and produced several papers, handing them to the judge with a triumphant look at Josephine. "A promissory note for $2,000, signed by my brother 6 months before his death." Judge Harmon examined the document carefully. "This appears to be in order," he said slowly. Josephine's heart sank. "However," the judge continued, "there's a simple way to verify its authenticity." He opened another folder on his desk and withdrew a document. "This is Richard Blackwood's original deed to the Silver Creek property, bearing his signature." He compared the signatures, then looked up, his expression stern. "These signatures don't match, Mr. Blackwood, not even close." Walter's confident smile faltered. "My brother's handwriting varied." "No," Josephine interrupted. "Richard's signature was distinctive. He lost 2 fingers on his right hand during the war, which gave his writing a particular slant." Judge Harmon nodded. "Mrs. Blackwood is correct. The signature on the deed shows this characteristic. The one on your promissory note does not." He set the papers down deliberately. "Mr. Blackwood, forging financial documents is a serious crime, as is attempting to sell another human being, which several witnesses in Independence confirm you tried to do." Walter's face had gone pale. "This is absurd. Sheriff, arrest them both." Sheriff Hayes shifted uncomfortably. "Well now, Walter, if the judge says the document's forged." "You're in on this too," Walter snarled, rounding on the sheriff. "I paid you good money to back my claim." A deadly silence fell over the room. Sheriff Hayes looked stricken, while Judge Harmon's expression hardened to granite. "Thank you for that admission, Mr. Blackwood," the judge said coldly. "Sheriff Hayes, I suggest you surrender your weapon to my bailiff. And Mr. Blackwood, you are under arrest for forgery, attempted human trafficking, bribery of an officer of the law, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping." Walter lunged toward Josephine, his face contorted with rage. "You bitch! That property should have been mine." Finn moved faster than thought, intercepting Walter and driving him back with a powerful blow to the jaw. Walter crashed into the judge's bookcase and slumped to the floor, dazed. "An assault," Judge Harmon added dryly, signaling for his bailiff. "Take them both into custody." As the bailiff led the stunned sheriff and the cursing Walter away, Judge Harmon turned back to Josephine and Finn. "Mrs. Blackwood, the Silver Creek property is indisputably yours. Recent surveys indicate substantial silver deposits on the land, which explains your brother-in-law's desperate actions." He handed her the deed. "I suggest you consider your next steps carefully. Such valuable property will attract many interested parties." Josephine stared at the document in her hands, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of her fortunes. From near destitution and the humiliation of being sold to pay a fraudulent debt, she had become a woman of substantial means. "Thank you, Your Honor," she managed, "for everything." Outside the courthouse in the bright Sacramento sunshine, Josephine turned to Finn. "It's over," she said wonderingly. "Really over." He smiled, relief evident in his face. "You're free, Josephine, free to make those choices you dreamed of." "Yes," she agreed. Looking at him, this man who had risked everything to help her, who had shown her kindness and courage when she needed it most, who had awakened feelings in her she'd thought impossible after Richard's death, she made her first truly free choice. "And I choose this." Rising on tiptoe, she kissed him, not caring who might see them on the courthouse steps. His arms went around her, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Finn rested his forehead against hers. "Does this mean I can court you properly now, Mrs. Blackwood?" she laughed, joy bubbling up inside her like a spring. "I believe it does, Mr. Sullivan." Over the following months, the Silver Creek property indeed proved as valuable as Judge Harmon had suggested. With Finn's guidance, Josephine hired reputable mining engineers and established a fair but profitable operation. Walter Blackwood and Sheriff Hayes were convicted of their crimes, with Walter receiving a substantial prison sentence. Finn's courtship, as promised, was proper but passionate. They took time to know each other away from the danger and urgency that had marked their first days together. He showed her his uncle's ranch, introduced her to friends from his days with the marshal's office, and listened attentively as she shared her dreams for the future. On a crisp autumn evening, exactly 1 year after he had stopped her sale in Independence, Finn took Josephine to a ridge overlooking the Silver Creek property. The mining operation hummed efficiently in the valley below, while the setting sun painted the Sierra Nevada mountains with gold and crimson, just as it had the day they first rode away together. "I have something to ask you," he said, taking her hands in his. "But first, I want to make sure you know that your answer won't change anything about the Silver Creek operation. That's yours, regardless." She smiled, loving him for his scrupulous honesty. "I know." Dropping to one knee, he looked up at her with those clear blue eyes that had first caught her attention in a crowded square. "Josephine Blackwood, I've loved you since the moment I saw you standing brave and defiant on that auction block. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. They were married in Sacramento 2 months later, with Judge Harmon officiating and Frank Sullivan beaming proudly from the front pew. Mrs. Chen prepared a feast for the reception, and even Mrs. Hollister and the Johnsons traveled from the stage stop to celebrate with them. The following spring, they built a home on a hill overlooking both the Silver Creek mine and a small ranch Finn established with his share of the mining proceeds. Neither of them wanted to live in independence with its painful memories, so they created their own community, hiring fair-minded people and establishing a reputation for honest business practices. When their first child was born, a son they named James Richard Sullivan, Josephine held him in her arms and marveled at how life could change so dramatically. From the brink of being sold like property, she had found not just freedom and security but a love deeper and truer than she had ever imagined possible. "What are you thinking?" Finn asked, sitting beside her on the porch swing as the summer twilight settled over their land. Josephine smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I'm thinking about debts," she said. "Not the kind Walter invented, but the real ones. How I once thought I owed you for saving me." "You never owed me anything," he insisted, as he always had. "I know that now," she said softly. "What's between us isn't about obligation or repayment. It never was." He kissed the top of her head, his arm tightening around her and their son. "No," he agreed. "What's between us is simply love, the kind that doesn't keep accounts." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Josephine Barrett Sullivan, once nearly sold to pay a debt she never owed, sat surrounded by the wealth that truly mattered. Family, freedom, and a love born in the most unlikely circumstances of the Wild West.